There is a type of fat inside you that you cannot pinch. You cannot see it in the mirror. It is packed between your liver, wrapped around your intestines, and pressed against your kidneys. This is visceral fat, and it is not just sitting there. It is pumping inflammatory signals into your bloodstream every single second. It raises your risk for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic collapse. And here is the part nobody talks about. The primary hormone driving its growth has almost nothing to do with how much you eat or how hard you exercise. Most people think belly fat is simple math. Eat less, move more, do some crunches, and it shrinks. But visceral fat cells carry up to 4 times more cortisol receptors than fat cells anywhere else on your body. 4 times. That means when your stress hormones stay elevated, your body preferentially deposits fat around your abdominal organs regardless of your caloric balance. Crunches strengthen muscle underneath the fat. They do not touch the hormonal signal, telling your body to store it there in the first place. So what does a breathing pattern? And I know how that sounds, but this is not wellness fluff. This is receptor biology, nervous system mechanics, and measurable hormonal change. We are going to follow the entire biological chain, system by system, from a single breath to the nerve it activates, to the cortisol cascade it suppresses, to the fat cell response that follows, to the mitochondrial process that finishes the job. Then I am going to walk you through the exact protocol, the timing, the posture, and the frequency, so you can start using it tonight. Let us start at the nerve. Your vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in your body. It starts at the base of your brain stem, threads down through your neck, passes through your chest, and branches out across your stomach, liver, and intestines. Think of it like a cable running from your brain to your gut, and this cable has a very specific job. It controls whether your body is in fight or flight mode or rest and repair mode. When the vagus nerve is active, it pulls you toward calm. When it is quiet, your stress system runs unchecked. Here is what most people do not know. Your diaphragm, the dome-shaped muscle underneath your lungs that drives every breath, sits right next to the main trunk of this nerve. When you take a slow, deep belly breath, your diaphragm drops down and physically presses against vagal nerve fibers. It stretches them, it compresses them, and that mechanical contact sends a direct signal up to your brain stem that says the threat is over, stand down. Shallow chest breathing, the kind most adults do all day without thinking, barely moves the diaphragm at all, which means the vagus nerve barely gets touched, which means your stress system never gets the stand down signal. You have been breathing 20,000 times a day your entire life, and for most of those breaths, you have been completely missing the one nerve that could shift your entire hormonal state. And here's the part that makes this even more interesting. About 80% of the signals traveling through the vagus nerve go upward, from body to brain, not the other way around. Your gut and your diaphragm are telling your brain how stressed you are far more than your brain is telling your body. That means the physical act of breathing is not just a response to your mental state. It is an input that shapes it. So when your diaphragm drops and stimulates that nerve, the signal travels up and hits your brain stem. And the very first thing your brain stem does is talk to a structure called the hypothalamus. This is the master control room for your stress hormones. The hypothalamus triggers the pituitary gland, which triggers the adrenal gland sitting on top of your kidneys, which release cortisol into your bloodstream. This 3-step chain, hypothalamus to pituitary to adrenals, is called the HPA axis. Think of it like a fire alarm system. The hypothalamus detects danger, the pituitary sounds the alarm, the adrenals flood the building with cortisol. In a normal, healthy body, this system fires when there is a real threat and shuts off when the threat is gone. But here is the problem. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a lion chasing you and a deadline you are dreading. Chronic psychological stress, the kind most people carry every single day, keeps the HPA axis turned on. The alarm never stops ringing. Cortisol never drops back to baseline. It is supposed to peak in the morning and taper off by night. Chronic stress flattens that curve. Your cortisol stays abnormally high around the clock. Now, when you activate the vagus nerve through slow diaphragmatic breathing, you send a parasympathetic signal that directly suppresses this axis. You're pulling the fire alarm off the wall. A single 10-minute session of controlled slow breathing, specifically a pattern where your exhale is longer than your inhale, has been shown to lower salivary cortisol within 5 to 10 minutes. That is a measurable hormonal shift from doing nothing but changing how you breathe. So now you have the first two dominoes. Breath activates the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve suppresses the HPA axis. Cortisol drops. The question is, why does your belly fat care? Every fat cell in your body has receptors on its surface. Think of them like locks on a door. Hormones are the keys. Different fat cells have different numbers of locks. And visceral fat, the fat packed around your organs, has up to 4 times more cortisol receptor locks than the fat under your skin anywhere else on your body. 4 times more. This means when cortisol circulates through your bloodstream, visceral fat absorbs the signal far more aggressively than fat on your arms, your legs, or your hips. Cortisol activates an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase in these cells, which pulls triglycerides out of the blood and packs them into storage. More cortisol means more storage. But it gets worse. Cortisol does not just fill existing fat cells, it also triggers immature cells in the abdominal area to develop into brand new fat cells. So high cortisol does not just stuff the warehouse, it builds new warehouses. This is why some people carry a thick layer of belly fat despite being lean everywhere else. It is not genetics. It is not diet. It is a receptor density problem. Their visceral fat is just better at hearing the cortisol signal. And this fat is not passive storage. Visceral fat acts almost like a rogue organ. It pumps out inflammatory molecules, things like interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis, factor alpha, that travel through the bloodstream and raise your baseline inflammation. A waist measurement over 40 inches for men or 35 inches for women is a clinical red flag, not because of how it looks, but because of the inflammatory load that tissue is generating. So the chain is clear. Lower cortisol and you remove the growth signal that visceral fat depends on. But stopping the signal is only half the equation. You also need to burn the fat that is already there. And this is where breathing does something most people would never expect. Your cells burn fat inside tiny structures called mitochondria. Think of mitochondria as furnaces. They take fatty acids, break them apart, and convert them into energy. But these furnaces need oxygen to run. Without enough oxygen, they cannot break down fat efficiently. Instead, your cells default to burning sugar, which requires less oxygen but produces less energy. Shallow chest-level breathing reduces how much oxygen actually reaches your blood. Your lungs have about 300 million tiny air sacs called alveoli, and shallow breaths only fill the ones at the top. The oxygen-rich sacs at the base of your lungs stay underinflated. Deep diaphragmatic breathing opens those lower sacs, dramatically improving how much oxygen transfers into your bloodstream. More oxygen in your blood means your mitochondria can run their fat-burning process at full capacity. And the parasympathetic state triggered by vagal activation also increases blood flow to your internal organs, including your visceral fat tissue. Better blood flow means fatty acids can be mobilized out of storage and delivered to the mitochondria more efficiently. But here is the fact that ties this entire chain together in a way almost nobody expects. When your body burns fat, where does it go? Most people say sweat, some say urine. The real answer is your lungs. About 84% of every fat molecule you burn exits your body as carbon dioxide. You exhale it. Your lungs are the primary exit route for metabolized fat. Breathing is not just the trigger that starts this process, it is the exhaust pipe that finishes it. So now you know the full chain. Breath moves the diaphragm. The diaphragm stimulates the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve suppresses the HPA axis. Cortisol drops. Visceral fat loses its growth signal. Oxygen increases. Mitochondria burn more fat. And you breathe the waste products out. The question is, what specific breathing pattern activates all four of these mechanisms at once? The technique is called extended exhale diaphragmatic breathing. Inhale through your nose for 4 seconds. As you inhale, your belly should push outward. Your chest should barely move. Then exhale slowly through your nose or through gently pursed lips for 8 seconds. Your belly pulls inward as the air leaves. The exhale is twice as long as the inhale. That ratio is the key. Because it is the exhalation phase, not the inhalation, that drives vagal activation. Most people think calming down means taking a big, deep breath in. The biology says the opposite. The power is in the slow breath out. Sit upright or lie flat on your back. Place one hand on your chest and one on your belly. If the hand on your chest is moving, you are breathing wrong. Only the belly hand should rise and fall. 5 minutes is the minimum effective dose. 10 minutes is optimal based on the cortisol data. Do it twice a day, once in the morning to reset your cortisol curve at the start of the day, once in the evening to lower cortisol before sleep when it should be at its lowest. If 4 seconds in and 8 seconds out feels too long at first, start at 3 seconds in and 6 seconds out. Build up over 1 to 2 weeks. Consistency matters more than intensity. Measurable changes in heart rate variability, which is the best proxy for vagal tone, typically appear within 2 to 4 weeks of daily practice. This is not something you will feel on day one, but the hormonal shift is happening from the very first session. Think about where you started. You came in thinking belly fat was about eating too much and moving too little. That crunches would fix it. That willpower was the missing piece. Now you know the real story. Visceral fat is not a discipline problem. It is a receptor problem. Those cells wrapped around your liver, packed between your intestines, pressed against your kidneys, every single one of them is covered in cortisol receptors at 4 times the density of fat anywhere else on your body. They are not waiting for calories. They are waiting for a signal. And you now know how to change that signal. Not with a diet, not with a supplement. With a breathing pattern that reaches the vagus nerve, suppresses the stress axis, drops cortisol, opens oxygen delivery to your mitochondria, and lets your lungs exhale the byproducts of fat that your body finally has permission to burn. 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out, 5 minutes minimum, twice a day. Morning and night, that is the minimum effective dose. Give it 4 weeks of consistency and the changes in your vagal tone become measurable. The body does not always respond to effort the way you expect. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is the quietest thing you can do. You take roughly 20,000 breaths every single day. You have been doing it your entire life without thinking about it once. Now you understand what each one of those breaths is capable of. The only difference between the breath you just took and the one that starts changing your hormonal profile tonight is whether you choose to control it.